Hear ye, casual painters and paintbrush phobes. Do not listen to the megalomaniacal mules that think that 24 thin coats is the only way to paint sexy plastic. Welcome to Marvel Crisis Protocol's Captain America Speed Painting Guide, where we debunk the theory that getting a mini tabletop ready is an exclusive privilege. In so doing, positioning you right in the sweet spot between speed and quality. To do so, we're going to be using Citadel's contrast paints that provide a one-coat solution that mimics the look of what would usually take 2 steps, that being basing and shading. But because you might want to use a different range of paints, we'll pop the names of the closest equivalents up on screen as we go. First things first, then, you need to prime your model. We're opting to use the complimentary Wraithbone spray can, as it gives a more natural and organic look when the contrast is applied. Of course, if you plan to use a different type of primer, make sure it's a white or off-white, because these paints do not work on darker tones. For the first real paint, we're actually cheating a little and using a layer paint, Stormhose Silver, on the front and back of the shield, which we found is a pretty swish way to bring a metallic finish to some of the contrast paints. Because the faux metallics you can get direct from a contrast paint pot do not cut any brand of mustard whatsoever. One thing to be wary of with this lightest of lightest silvers though is that it's not pigment heavy, so, apply wholesomely but evenly. Blood Angel's Red is up next on the boots, gloves and every other panel in the midriff. We can also see now why we base coated the metallics with the Stormhose Silver, as you'll see the finish after a somewhat finicky application of red on the outermost and innermost rings of the shield. Don't forget as well the circle around the A for America on the shoulder, and be sure to use a fairly fine brush, as the technique for thin lines like this is more akin to how you'd highlight with traditional acrylic paints. We're then rocking one of the newer contrast paints, Garagax Sewer, on all the straps and the belt, as well as the barely visible chin straps. Don't worry too much about avoiding the metal buttons and clasps on the belt and pouches when doing so, because we'll be highlighting these with a non-contrast layer paint later. Do however be as careful as you can when applying to the straps over the torso, as you can easily bleed over onto the suit. Then we reach for some Apothecary White for the alternating panels on the midriff and on the wings on the side of his noggin. Make sure you apply paint using the less is more methodology, much like with the red around the A we did earlier. We've also got to finish off the exterior of the shield with the middle ring and the star, which requires a steady hand, but won't reactivate or mess with the red you've already painted. We've also got the arms between the suit and the gloves to cover as well. But now the fun bit. Grab your Talasar Blue and go buck wild on the costume or suit or whatever you want to call it. Try and leave the brush on the model when you're applying contrast paints over larger areas to get the most even coverage. You'll also want to pay close attention to what you're putting where on the head. Here you'll need to look around the eye slits and the ears closely, and you can switch to your fine brush for this if you want a bit more control. Oh, and don't forget as well the middle of the A on the shoulder. Gilliman Flesh is next on the paintbrush for the face, but not the chin strap, and the eyes as well. There's not much to this part, all of the required areas are recessed to what we've already painted, so, just don't get excited. We then move to a non-contrast base paint, Iron Hand Steel, which is lighter than the lead belcher we've used for previous models in this core set. Here we're applying it on all the clasps on the straps, the buttons on the belt, gloves and boot, and finally on the grate on the base as well. Finally then we turn to our trusty Basilicanum Grey to leave its decidedly average, but it's as good as you're going to get mark on the base. Remember to paint it all, because these bases tend to be tricksy and optical illusion you into thinking you painted everywhere, especially on the vertical elements. Of course what you do with the edge of the base is up to you. I've just slathered this all over it and this is how it looks. And that is Captain America tabletop ready in the not so blink of an eye. Models like this show you the best of what you can achieve with just one coat and very little drama involved in the process. So whilst you might be more than happy with that and you're ready to call it a day, We're going to tarry on at the paint station and add a few highlights and finishing touches to the model with some non-contrast paints. Nothing too excessive in the spirit of this video, but for just a little extra effort we can take this model to the next level. And to do so, we're first going to grab us some Wild Rider Red to highlight the gloves and the boots, focusing of course on the raised parts, which you should consider a repeatable mantra for the remainder of the video. The gloves and the boots make this task uber easy though, as everything's fairly angled and pronounced. We then opt for some non-oil shade on all the clasps and buttons, just to give it a little bit of depth, which will be a lot more noticeable on the comparatively larger areas. Our highlight of choice for the leather is some Steel Legion Drab. Again, whatever we applied Garrigax Sewer to earlier, we can apply a conservative highlight to now. It might not always be obvious what's raised and what's not on fastened flat areas like this, so when in doubt just focus on the edges and look from the top down if you're not sure. We then bring the white areas back with some Corax white, just to remove any of the areas that were left too drab by the apothecary white. With parts of the model meant to represent fabric, it's not an exact science, but just consider what's raised from a top-down perspective and job's a good un. Now whilst Guilliman flesh does an able job, a highlight of Cadian flesh tone on the face is up next to get some blood in those cheeks. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can paint a couple of very thin vertical strips of Abaddon black on each eye as well before you do so. And doing it in that order, you can mop up any mistakes with the flesh tone. For the suit costume, we opted for some Lothern blue. This serves two purposes, one to give some further contrast, but also to cover up any unfortunate splotching. It is also a perfect opportunity to start small when highlighting, wait for the paint to dry if you're new to all this speed painting, and add more highlights if it's needed in incremental steps. Which brings us to the final step, the base, where a dry brush of Administratum Grey is the order of the day. For flat surfaces like this, be sure you've got the bulk of that paint off the brush before lightly doing that back and forth motion. Yes, lest you be treated to ugly smear lines. We then highlight once more the grey with Iron Hand Steel, and finally Abaddon Black the edge of the base to give the model a full and certified nod of approval. And that, as they say, is proof that you don't need to be an expert to get good results. I'm sure many of you will be happy with just the contrast paint steps, but it just goes to show what can be achieved with minimal time investment. Stay tuned for more speed painting guides. Alas, I've been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.